Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the home office. Wanted to do that tonight because we've got a special show with you. This is all about the AC4400. Now, you've heard me say on Train Tuesday and other shows in the past how much our developers put into each product, and the AC4400 is going to be our flagship model of the year. And there's nobody better to describe it than our own Jon Stackpole with Athearn, our lead developer. Now, I'm going to forego the shout outs tonight for a couple of reasons. One, we've got a lot of ground to cover. There's a lot of stuff, and we want to save some time for you guys to ask some questions. So here's how the show is going to work out. I've got Jon talking about the AC4400, and I got special guests Tony Cook and Harry Wong. And I'm going to be monitoring comments and questions. I'll be watching for those comments and questions and putting those up on the screen for any of the three gentlemen to answer. And we're basically going to have fun about the AC4400. So let's get started. I'm going to start by bringing Jon on board here. Evening, Jon. How's it going?
I'm doing well.
So I heard that you are armed to the teeth with info, and these guys are in for a real treat.
I hope what I share is interesting. It certainly has kept me busy for the last year.
Yeah, no, I'm sure everybody's going to be interested with that. And speaking of folks that are interested with that, first guest tonight is Harry Wong. He's the associate editor of RMC.
Hey guys.
Good evening, Harry.
Hey guys.
How's it going?
Pretty good out here. It's a little rainy, and it's AC4400 weather. We're good.
There you go. There you go.
Well, that's where ACs basically dominate.
Great. Yeah. Well, we're glad to have you on board, and I know this is going to be a great show. And I've got someone else in the magazine industry from Model Railroad News and HO Collector. Got Tony Cook. Good evening, Tony.
Hey, everybody. How you doing?
All right. Well, thanks for coming on board. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and switch monitors here so I can watch all of our friendly modelers out there in their workshops across the country, the United States, and around the world. And Jon, go ahead and get us started. Tell us about the AC4400.
Great. Well, to start off with, I'm like a self-taught pianist. When it comes to the AC4400, my interest is the 1980s, which was before their time. So a lot of the things I've looked at for the last year on these locomotives, I'm looking at the doodads and gizmos and louvers and panel lines, and I can say, yep, that's different from that one. But do I know what that thing does? Not all the time. So excuse me if I make any glaring mistakes, and correct me in the comments here. A couple of years from now, I'm going to know a lot more about some of the things that I'm not interested in. As everyone learns as you go through this hobby, it's a great hobby to be in. I might end up buying every one of these just because I've spent so much time looking at them. I want them for my shelf. So the AC4400 is a project in the Genesis 2.0 line that we morphed out of the Dash 9. General Electric basically built the two locomotives starting at the same time. So they share a lot of common characteristics between the two. The biggest difference, of course, being the Dash 9 is the DC traction, and then the AC4400 being the AC traction, primarily developed to compete with EMD's SD70 Max. AC traction is really great for getting heavy loads started. So the low speed power is much better than the DC. So the AC units were very common on coal trains, long haul freights that are heavy, whereas the DC equipped locomotives were generally used for more of your fast freights or priority trains that weren't as heavy and just needed to get there fast. A lot of what I want to talk about today with the AC4400s is just the amount of detail that we've put into these. As a product developer, I get a lot of requests for, hey, you've got this tooling for this nose and you have this body. Can you just put the two together? And I wish that was the case. There is so many more details that you're missing other than just this nose and this body. It's what are all the other details on that nose? What are all the other details on that body? And were they designed at the same time? Because maybe the nose has a square peg and the body has a round hole, and we can't put them together because of that. When you get to the level of detail that we're working on, it's also really hard to cut new tooling that matches. One of the greatest faux pas that we kind of see in the model railroad industry is panel lines. I'm sure if you've ever looked at a locomotive, you can see where the molds come together. And if those aren't perfect, you're going to get a little lip. And really the only way to avoid that is if you cut all the tooling you'll ever need at the same time. So I'll be showing 6 railroads of locomotives here, but we have cut tooling for basically every single AC4400 plus a few of the rebuilds that we're not even talking about yet, so that everything's going to fit together. We can use these toolings to produce lots and lots and lots of variations. There's a few specific models that I've blackballed just because the amount of tooling changes needed for that one-off locomotive, we decided to skip. You know, we're going to give you a couple thousand road numbers eventually here out of these tools. We can skip a few every once in a while.
So, John, quickly, for folks that maybe not are as familiar with the General Electric AC4400, can you give us a quick background and why this was our most requested locomotive of the past 2 years?
Well, it's probably because of the scope of the project. There's been AC4400s built. We have one in the Roundhouse line, but the number of variations is really daunting. So it takes a lot of research to identify all the variations, and then it takes a lot of money to pay for the tooling for all the variations. So it's one of those big projects that hadn't been done yet, that had lots and lots of railroads, lots of road numbers, lots of rebuilds out there. And we're really happy to bring this out. And then the 2.0 detail level just allows us to get down to that road number specific detail.
All right. So which ones do you want to talk about first, John? Do you want to just kind of go through the list of what we've announced for this month?
Well, yeah. I think we should start out with our artwork.
That's a good point. One of the things that John's referring to is, and we talked a little bit about it on Train Tuesday, but there have been some revisions, and John can talk a little bit about this too, which is really important, and actually one of the advantages of the way Athearn does their models. There are some refinements that are forthcoming, and John's probably going to talk about some of those refinements. We did get some feedback from you guys out there. We really do appreciate it. And we will probably see those updates on our website soon and in other media very soon, probably before the beginning of next week.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to share my screen here so we can take a look at some of this artwork. All right. In alphabetical order, the first unit we're going to look at here is the CEFX number 1002 and also 1020. They share similar features here. CEFX, or as we know it, the CIT group, is a leaser. Railroads are getting out of the locomotive ownership business. Owning a locomotive is expensive. It's easier to lease it, and when there's a problem, you give it back to the leaser and say, hey, fix this. Or in 10 years, when it's close to being worn out, you don't have to worry about rebuilding it. You just end your lease and hand it back. And that's why we're seeing more and more leasers out there. These are known as the Bluebird paint job. Very attractive blue with a reflective white on it. until we get reasonable reflective paint in scale, man, that'll be cool if we can actually paint reflective paint. But right now, unfortunately, all the reflective stripes are too thick to really apply over detail. But these are cool. These were ordered to fulfill a need by the Union Pacific, and they were built to Union Pacific specs. If you look at the underbody, that's Harbor Mist Gray to match UP. There's also a lot of detail features on these that line with the AC4400s that the UP ordered directly. In comparison, here is CFX 1048. This locomotive, this group of locomotives was ordered to fill a need by the Canadian Pacific. And these have different features. The underbody is black on these and walkways. There's also all the Canadian Pacific specific decals. In Canada, they have decals for fire extinguishers, first aid kits, and a lot of their warning labels are very unique. Also, because this unit is used in the far north, windshields get icy. These locomotives actually have de-icers or heating elements in the windows themselves to help with the icing situation and keep the windshield wipers working. When I was researching this locomotive, I discovered that they actually printed the road number on the inside of the windshield. So when you're calling out to your dispatch, you know which locomotive you're in. So we've been able to replicate that on this locomotive. One of the big changes that we made since the artwork came out in the announcement, and we've made more changes than usual in this run. I was doing some redesigning, re-engineering of some of the internals of these locomotives fairly late in the process. And I just ran out of time to get these to the art team. They didn't have quite enough time to finalize everything and get all the reviews that we needed. But we didn't want to push back the delivery date of these any further. So we decided to just go to press with the art that we had. And a week later, I have much better art to show you. But one of the big changes here is these number boards. One of the holdups in building in miniature is tolerances. How tight can you make something? We discovered that our number boards were the correct size. However, the insert, the actual part that we print the number board on, because of paint tolerances, we were 0.3 millimeters small, which that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but that multiplies out to 2 to 3 inches in size difference. So we made some modifications to enlarge the number board, the printed number board area, to look accurate. So they're not undersized like we could have done.
And those, I assume, will be illuminated on the model, of course.
Oh yeah, absolutely. With the 2.0 features, they're going to be lit number boards. Ditch lights are lighted. Walkway lights, you can see the little round circle right there. That's a walkway light that'll be illuminated. They also have ground lights on them.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, one of my pet peeves is seeing undersized number board lettering and, you know, on RTR models, and I'm really glad that you're addressing that.
Now, Tony, I think you sent us a picture of one of the CEFX from one of my old stomping grounds. And you can see some of the subtle differences that Jon's talking about from unit to unit. I'll go ahead and share it real quick. You got a little bit of background. This is Rochelle, Illinois, isn't it? Oops, now I lost
It
it.
is, and I'm trying to remember if it's my picture or whose. I'll recognize it probably when I see it.
Yeah, let's see.
I can't remember if it's from Kevin U. Daly's collection of slides or because it's from the the train park there at Rochelle where the
Yeah.
BNSF and UP cross. Yes, that's one of Kevin's. That's a Jim Bozier slide, March of '97, and that's eastbound on the Northwestern. So you'd be standing there on the north side of the park.
Mhm.
And I didn't realize that, John, on the when you mentioned the underbodies being gray for the UP order, or the ones working on the UP and black for these, like, oh, because I do remember in looking at it, seeing the gray and thinking, wow, that does look like UP, but then didn't give it another thought. And it's like, oh, there is a reason. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, it's when you look at these, it's really hard to figure out colors sometimes because I think they were clean for a day and then they drug them through the mud. And everything black looks gray and everything gray looks black. And you do a lot of research to come down to these colors. And there's an interesting feature on this photo here. These CEFX units, through my research, I discovered that they changed plows frequently. It seemed to be randomly through the ages. So the plow that I have on the artwork is different than the plow that's shown there in the photo. But in order to match the era that the modeler wants, I'm putting the plow in the photo in the box. So this unit's going to come with 2 plows.
Nice.
Or these 3, I should say.
And this one too has, this is probably a different one, I guess, John, because it's got the upper number boards instead of number boards on its nose.
Yep, you're right. The CP locomotives had the number boards in the nose, and the UP leased ones.
Oh, to match. Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, to match railroad specs.
It's all this minutia, Harry. Can't we go back to blue box stuff where one shell does all?
No, thanks. Now let's go get a flea market for that. That's pretty much where I'm at. You'll see me selling all those at the flea market.
All right, all right.
Yeah. Cool. The next piece of artwork here is C&W.
I love that scheme.
Yeah, this is a beautiful Operation Lifesaver paint job. These were almost immediately put to use out in the Powder River Basin. I remember watching Pentrex videos on the VHS player of these coal trains and the sound of those things pounding up the hills. They're just amazing. One of the changes that we've made since the announcement is on the nose of these locomotives. And this is one of those things that even from this size, it's going to be hard to see, but I got to get in really close. What color are the front hand grabs? Most people will call them green, but they're actually yellow. They're actually yellow with an anti-slip black coating on it. And your eye plays a trick. And when you see yellow and black together, it looks green. But we're going to put these out there and actually hand paint those grab irons black in the middle and get these the closest to most accurate that we've ever seen. You can also see these top grabs are green with a yellow grab section here.
Now, John, these the Chicago Northwestern ones that we're offering, these are based on the early deliveries that C&W got in 1994, correct?
Yes, these are almost as delivered. Yeah, there's a lot of changes that happen to a locomotive. They'll spec them to come from the factory, and then as soon as they hit the railroad, they're going to make a couple changes to them. So this is almost as delivered.
Nice. Tony, I'm sure you probably saw these more than once, not too long ago. It doesn't seem too long ago, anyways.
No, it doesn't, I was going to say it doesn't seem that long ago. Yeah. And I forget, Harry, what wasn't there 2 of them that hung around forever that are they painted out yet, or were
Those
they
were
dash nine?
-9s that hung
Those are
around
nine.
forever.
Oh, okay.
Well, I think I saw some readers or some of the folks out there asking, so what's the diff between this and a -9? And I think I just wanted to point that out, if I may.
Yeah.
If you look on the conductor side, like John's showing here of this 8801 Chicago Northwestern, you'll see a large inverter cabinet underneath a dynamic brake area. This giant box that sits on the walkway behind the cab, and that you can tell where that box is because the handrails kind of jump up at that point, intersecting with the dynamic brakes above it. Dash 9s don't have that. Dash 9s basically have battery and equipment box doors over there, and in the normal GE fashion, where they just step up a little bit, like about a foot and a half.
And aren't the louvers on both sides over the, like under the Northwestern Herald for the traction motors, aren't there where it says look, listen, and live to the right? Is that something else? The ACs have louvers there, whereas a Dash 9 smooth in that spot on both sides, I think, over that center axle, lead axle. Is that right?
You're talking about this area right here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Harry froze. That's why he's not. It's like, Harry, quit talking to me. He froze.
No.
He'll come back. I can answer that question. So on a Dash 9, instead of the inverter cabinet, frequently the air conditioner.
Inverter cabinet. That's for the electronics for the AC traction.
There you go. Harry, you froze up there on us. You just
okay, yeah. So like I was saying, behind a cab, it's this large box that AC 4400s have that Dash 9s don't have. And the reason for that is to house the electronics and the inverters for the AC traction motors underneath that the Dash 9s don't have. Dash 9s are direct current. ACs are obviously alternating current. And you need a whole bunch of computers can control all that, how the electricity is routed to the traction motors on AC locomotives. That's why we haven't had AC locomotives until the 1990s, for production. If you look at railroad history, the SD70 Mac was the first production AC diesel locomotive in the U.S. in North America. Before that, the Canadian Pacific had an M640, the one big ALCO that they had, or MLW that they had north of the border, and that the Canadian Pacific had they converted that locomotive from DC to AC as an experiment in cooperation with Brown Boveri back in the mid '80s. After that, once they figured out, hey, we can do this, EMD jumped right on it. Turned out the SD70 Mac for BN primarily, and then GE says, hey, we can't let them get away with this, and that's why they came out with the AC4400. And in the end, the AC4400 was the huge winner in the marketplace.
And then, John, you were commenting on what I was asking on the louvers over the truck.
Yeah, so right underneath the cab, that's the air conditioner on these units. And you'll see that very frequently be mismatched paint job because there's actually spots where you can stick forklift blades into it and pull the whole AC unit out. So when the AC failed, fairly frequently they just pull it and swap it with a functioning unit. So you'd often get different colored AC units under there.
Right.
And then as they aged, the technology changed, and there's a lot of variation in what this area looks like on each unit. There's actually 17.
Yeah. The other thing too is with Dash 9s, the AC unit was on the back walkway right behind the cab on this side, on the conductor side. Yep. It's a much larger unit visually from the outside than this little box you see at the bottom corner of the cab on an AC 4400.
Yeah. And if you happen to be on the engineer side, your best telltale, and it's subtle, is the length of this radiator. The AC4400 has a longer radiator than the Dash 9.
Okay. And these are some good comments because, again, John and I were talking before the beginning of the show. It's real simple for somebody that may not be as well versed with the AC4400 to think that, oh, they all look the same, or they look the same as the Dash 9. And these are some of the more common things that separate these two. But as we'll talk further into the show, we're going to see even more subtle differences, not only between the two locomotives, but the AC4400s themselves, depending on who ordered them. And I think, John, you said you even had some information about paint versus GE versus the home shops.
Yeah, there's a lot of variations. A lot of variations.
And all your Northwestern ones are Operation Lifesaver. That surprised me at first when I looked. I don't remember. Is that all of them, or was the whole run, or do you know? Like
the entire run.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
they were all delivered like that.
I didn't remember that. Wow, cool.
Yeah, 30 of them, if I can remember right.
Wow.
Yeah. Moving through the alphabet, we're going to break down into some specific locomotives. This is CSX number 1. This is one of the locomotives we teased early on, Spirit of West Virginia. What's really neat about CSX number 1 is not only is it the first on the roster, but it's also one of the first 6 AC4400s produced. And because of that, it has a lot of variations from basically all the other locomotives in this. From the engineer side on the back, you can see these radiator panels are all the same height and are all fairly short. That only appears on those 6 locomotives. There's also variations between dynamic brakes and grab iron placement. Most uniquely, and it's a little tough to see here, I'll zoom in some more. The nose grab irons are a one-piece angled grab, whereas on the rest of the AC4400s, that's actually 2 separate grab irons there. If you get the magnifier out, you can actually read all these labels. They're not squiggly lines. They are actual real text that we copied off of photos of the warning labels.
We're always saying that in the reviews, and finally this one, my assistant editor Shane, we did the TFM 70 Mac, I believe it was, and in the review coming in the May Model Railroad News, we zoom in and actually, so you don't have to get a magnifying glass, we show you the red that you can really read. I got a couple blow-up images because I always see that in reviews, and it's like, let's actually show that. I said, zoom in and get me a picture good enough that we can print it and show that you really can read those. Yeah. That's very
cool. If we make a spelling mistake, you better believe we hear about it.
And John, Tony actually shared with me, I've got an actual prototype picture of number 1 here. I'll show it on the screen here real quick for our audience to see. And looks like this was taken in 2003, Tony.
Yeah, Frank Ferguson shot from Kevin's collection in Willsmere, Delaware. And John, I didn't realize until you just said that these first 6, the openings there in the back along the radiator by the handrails are all kind of evenly sized. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things, the minute you said, I'm like, oh yeah, look at that. And I immediately am looking over here at some other pictures I have on my other monitor. I'm like, oh yeah, that is totally unique. Wow.
Yeah. I'm having trouble zooming in on the Athearn webpage right now. We have another image of this as a banner, and it's actually an earlier image than the model that we're producing. The trucks on this locomotive were changed. When this locomotive was delivered, it was delivered as number 9100. And then they repainted it into CSX1. And then they changed the trucks from the high adhesion to the GE steerables. So there's a lot of variations. And one of the interesting things is when General Electric delivered these, they had their own paint shop paint these up. And they took a little bit of liberty with the fonts used. So we've actually represented the model with 2 different fonts in the number boards. lost one, perhaps. Maybe got stolen, swiped. They forgot to do it, but they didn't change the General Electric font on the right side number board on these locomotives. So we have the original number board in there, and then when CSX repainted it, they went with their font. So it's slightly different.
Wow.
In CSX modelers, when you zoom in, we have the correct CSX font on the side. Out of all the variations, we've traced these off of photos to get these as close to accurate as possible. Couple of changes that we did make on this artwork since the announcement. Probably the most noticeable is the nose. I looked at thousands of photos, and I could have swore that was a black nose. It was blacker than black in photos I was looking at. And I remember seeing them in real life and thinking, well, that's a black nose. Turns out it's an anti-slip coating on the nose that likes to collect dirt. We all have that nice jacket that just gets dirty so quick. That's what's happening with these noses. So the noses were delivered blue, but got dirty quick. So if you're into distressing and weathering your models, you're going to want to dirty up that nose pretty quick. We also noticed that later in life, this locomotive had its kick steps painted yellow. And that's one of those hard things to tell when you're looking at photos. Is it yellow? Is it dirty? Is it black? Turns out they were black. And later in life, this locomotive did get yellow kick steps, but that's much later in life. So you'd also have the conspicuity stripes down the side. You'd have PTC antenna array on the top. So a little bit outside the era of what we're showing here.
Yeah, and John, to add to your comment about the anti-glare material on the nose, I've got an example here. It's not one that we're offering, but here's an example. Speaking of what John's talking about, I can zoom in on this here a little bit. From here, I don't know about you guys' eyes, but to me, yeah, it definitely looks black. But in a second, I'll show you a picture that's proving John's point. Let me grab that picture real quick. Let's see. This was another one that Tony, you sent me. This is a Jim Conroy photo I'm going to bring up. It's thinking. And see if we zoom in. Again, this isn't one we're offering, but this was, John, you said in your research, this was pretty much standard practice with CSX AC4400s, correct?
Yep.
So
yeah, you can see not only that blue nose, but you can also see that the two separate grab irons on that version versus the CSX one that has the one. There's also an anti-slip on the entire cab, and then kind of like a skunk stripe down the roof of the locomotive. And you can see how that just collects dirt. GEs are famous for imitating steam engines. There's a lot of soot coming out of there, so it was hard to keep these units clean, especially if there was any of the locomotives that were going through tunnels.
Neat shot. So this is one of the things, we talk about it on Train Tuesday. We talked about it some other lives. These are the subtle things that all the developers like John have to spend so much time on. And something as simple as the anti-glare panel, it's either right or it's not. And thanks to some exhaustive research, we've got the right deal. If you want it to be black, you're going to have to do some weathering, like John said.
Yeah. CSX has some cool features that are different from everybody else. When you look at the rear here, there's a chain hanging from the walkway. That's actually called the pull chain. They would actually recover and pull things with that chain. I would imagine if they broke a knuckle, they could chain something up and pull it out of the way. but all the CSX locomotives are equipped with this chain. They usually were found on the right rear of the locomotive, but they also had hooks on the left front, and you can see they're yellow on the front here, where you'd also sometimes see the chain. So we've put that detail in there for your CSX modelers.
I didn't know that. It has nothing to do with the brake, because the rear wheel, that's a brake, isn't it? The chain back there.
Yes, the chain on this end, that's
Okay.
the parking brake. Yep.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yep, on this side.
This locomotive is also kind of interesting. This is the not quite as delivered. One of the things that the GE learned is a lesson that came from actually EMD. EMD discovered this when they built the F45, the car body 20-cylinder locomotive, that with all that weight up high, they liked to rock back and forth, back and forth. They were rough riding locomotives. And these locomotives are getting heavy as well. So GE wanted to figure out how to stop all that shifting. And how they did it was with struts on the axles. Originally, they put a strut on the outside corners of every truck. So there would be a total of 8 struts on a locomotive. Then they discovered they only really needed them on alternate corners. So they went down to 2 on one truck on one side and then 2 on the other truck on the other side. And that was sufficient. You know, struts wear out, they need to be maintained. And the more you have, the more expensive it is. So if you can get away with fewer, that's definitely better for them. When they were originally delivered, these struts were inside of the brake line. If I were to hop back to the C&W, we've modeled the inside strut on this locomotive, and then the outside strut on this one. Most of the railroads discover that it's really hard to maintain the struts when they're inside the brake cylinder there. So they moved them to be outside, and that's what General Electric eventually did too, is they started positioning them on the outside from the factory. So now we have 3 different truck variations: inside strut, outside strut, and the steerable truck. CSX number 420. This is the most modern of the CSX locomotives we're offering in this run. You can see the conspicuous stripes along the sill there. That was a FRA requirement. Harry, Tony, helped me out on the date that was required.
05, I think, Harry.
I'll say 05 or 06.
Yeah, it's about in that range. Not quite sure myself.
Yeah. You also find the PTC antenna array on the roof of this one. On the other 2 CSX locomotives, the PTC antenna array is on a sprue that we have to inject to build the rest of the model. It wasn't appropriate for the era, but I didn't want to throw away the parts, so we are going to put them in a baggie and put them in the box. So if you are a modern modeler, the PTC antennas won't be installed, but they'll be in the box so that you can add them if you'd like.
John, I just want to say I really love those little extras that you're including in the box to give consumers a choice, because that's always been something that, you know, I've kind of looked for and really appreciate.
Yeah, we pay attention to what breaks in shipping. It's with all these details, there's something bound to not make it, and we're keeping tabs on that. And if we have enough breakage, the first thing I'm going to do is try to fix the packaging so it doesn't break. But we can also throw that in. It costs us a couple cents to put an extra piece in there. So we like to try to do that.
Yeah, it's those extra little goodies in there on the side of the package.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're getting a lot of questions about the GE demonstrator. I'm presuming that's GE 2000 we're talking about, /4400.
So, yeah, and I'm sure we're going to get questions on that one forever and ever. And
Yeah.
it might be in the future, but the big issue with that locomotive is it rides on yet a different style truck, and it's not the same truck as any of these. It's a completely different wheelbase. So
Yeah,
it's a very different model.
It's the MLW DeFasco truck that you see on like big M630s and M636s up in Canada. And
Wow.
I guess GE had a plant up there for a while, and they managed to have this extra set, and they wanted to play with it.
Hey, John, briefly, I've got a question coming in from John. I'll put it up here on the screen. He wants to know, with the arrays, will the cab roofs be removable like these SD70 Aces?
The answer to that question is no. I know a lot of people like the removable roof that we offered in a few of the EMD models. We are having issues with those lining up. It's very hard to keep the tooling in spec so that the roof nestles down and looks like it should. We don't want it sitting up there all cattywampus. So we opted to make these a one-piece cab. So the roof is part of the cab on these.
Okay. Good explanation. That makes sense. And of course, we're seeing a lot of folks commenting, will you do UP? Will you do BNSF paint in the future? I think it's safe to say, John, we've got plenty to draw from in the future with this, don't we?
Yeah. I have the first 6 production runs planned out already for these. And I could easily do another 6 with all the paint scheme variations there are. I can say, and here's your hint of the night, the second run of AC4400s is coming this calendar year. So you don't have to wait that long to get some additional road names.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And production on these goes all the way up, doesn't it? To their basic, what, 93 up to today's ES, the Gevos, replace these?
93 to 2004, GE was making these.
Yes, I thought it had a good like 10, 12-year run.
Pretty good run, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, a good production run, but these things are still out on every railroad.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
They're running them to the ground. The only reason why they stopped building them is the EPA's Tier 2 requirements kicked in. And that's where the Evolution series, the ES44s, came in to meet those Tier 2 compliance.
Yeah, I mean, this GE AC44 is a great contrast to earlier GEs, like GE U-boats, the U30s and things like that, because the old Universal series, they'd scrap them within 10 to 12 years.
Oh, yeah.
Railroads just didn't rebuild those by and large, except for the Santa Fe, really. And with the AC44s, well, we're seeing a much longer lifespan because GE just delivered a better product. It's not just having nice credit. They'd stick these things in the deadline just really fast if they weren't performing, and we're still seeing them out there.
I think this locomotive is the turning point for General Electric. This is the point when they started eclipsing their competitors with reliability and performance.
Yeah, this one rang all the bells. I mean, it pretty much put the nails in the coffin for its competitors. Sad to say for the EMD fans out there. I mean, I love EMDs, but these GEs really stood up for themselves.
Yeah. With all the railroad news that's happening between the possible merger between the Kansas City Southern and the Southern Pacific,
What? What's going on? Yeah.
KCSP? I'm down for that.
Oh, wow.
I think that's a much better combo.
Wow. The Daylight Bell. Yeah.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of people interested in the as-delivered gray scheme, but I wanted to make sure all our modelers north of the border had something to pick up besides that CFX unit. So you're already seeing these Kansas City Southern units on run-through trains, pooled power, and pretty soon it's going to be just everywhere. They're going to get out west, I would imagine. But the Southern Belle paint scheme is just gorgeous. It's one of those.
Yeah, we've seen all of us do out here.
It's hard to tell sometimes what the roof is. Is it gray? Is it black? Is it white? These were as delivered in a very shiny silver, but they did get dirty fast. Silver is not exactly a good color for a GE. And because the Kansas City Southern did run south of the border, all the warning labels on this locomotive are dual lingual. I'm going to get in close here so we can see it. Look at that.
Nice.
Awesome.
That's very neat.
That is awesome.
And then what is the color there below, John? You've got the light colors, and then the dark color is black or Brunswick green?
This is a green.
Okay, yeah. But then is it black below the frame?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I was gonna say I've had that discussion before, and I get told no. I'm like, yeah, I think it is. Like that's actually two different colors. But once they get going, it's hard to tell, or in the sun and whatever.
Yeah. Kansas City Southern takes a great pride in these locomotives, and these get cleaned fairly frequently, at least from the photo evidence I see. They're definitely some of the best looking paint jobs out there.
Yeah,
so
that's for sure.
And
I
for
just
what
love
I was
how heavily optioned the KCS AC44s are, because you've got the extended range dynamics with basically 3 dynamic brake sections, the radial, or not radial, but steerable trucks, the inverter cabinet in the walkway. They just look great.
Yeah.
I was told, and Tony probably already knows this, but the Brunswick green, which is sometimes mistaken for black, is literally 12 parts black to 1 part green, or 1 part yellow, rather, chrome yellow.
Wow.
And but it's really classy on this paint scheme.
We have got, I have an ad. I haven't seen the ad yet, but Kevin Udaley's been working for years, literally covering Kansas City Southern system. And we have a new hardcover book that he's done all the photography on and covers KCS from one end to the other. That I don't know if it's 100% announced yet. Like I say, the ad's in the issue of Model Road News I'm laying out now. So it's all but public if it's not already, but there'll be a hardcover KCS book out later this year, I believe.
Sounds awesome.
From Kevin. And I've seen a number of the pages and such, and it's unbelievable. Great stuff.
That sounds like if you're a Kansas City Southern fan, you've got some AC4400s to pre-order, and sounds like you need to look into that book. That sounds like a really cool book, Tony.
It should be very good. Yeah, I've seen I saw a number of the pages recently when I was down in Texas, and it does look great. I think it's at the printer. John, now on the handrail, Harry mentioned the triple dynamics, that extended dynamics, the way the handrail comes and then shoots down and bends. Don't you have a couple of variations between either production or road names for that on this run too?
Yeah, I do. There's a total of 11 handrail configurations on that left side. It's a little hard to see in the artwork phase, but I have some 3D models that I'll show, and I'll point out exactly what we're talking about with dynamic brakes if you don't know where those are in this unit, and why there's handrail variations there. One thing to note, I'm seeing a few mentions here in the comments as I go by. Color reproduction. Color is something that we try really hard to map. We look at locomotives under sunlight, and we usually model under fluorescence. And all that light will change the color as it's rendered in your eye. You won't see it the same. We try to match the locomotive in daylight. And then when you see the artwork, computers have a hard time representing the actual color that we're trying to show. A lot of it will depend on your monitor, how good of a screen you have. Will it produce the colors accurately? But when it comes time for us painting the models, we have paint chips at our factory that they're matching. And then we're basically just telling them, this is the color you need. this is the mix ratio, mix it up. So there's no confusion when the factory makes up the model that they're matching the paint.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, working with color theory in my past employer, you're right. Different screens, different resolutions, and even printing. And a lot of us, like you said, might have our modeling done under fluorescent, and depending on the fluorescent bulb, it's going to cast a blue or a green tint to it, which will drastically change the, you know, the color. So I can speak for Jon that there's exhaustive research done just in the color department at Athearn. Lots of work.
Yeah. I have a light booth that I'll use that has both a warm white, a cool white, a tungsten, and a daylight bulb in it. And you look at your paint chip and you look at your other paint chip, and you make sure they look the same to each other in all the different lights, and that's when you know you have a match. We need to get on to Harry's favorite here.
Oh, yay.
Southern Pacific had the largest order of AC4400s as a single order. It was so large that it took a couple of years for General Electric to build them all. And as they were built, there was a lot of changes that were made. So we have 2 locomotives from the earlier series and 1 from the later series of delivery. Interesting thing about both these and the Chicago Northwestern AC4400s, you know, they started producing these units in 1993. 1994, 95 is when most of them were built. Union Pacific fans will be able to point out that they acquired Southern Pacific and Chicago Northwestern in 1996. So these units were brand new when the Union Pacific took control. And they had a lot of locomotives running around. They didn't get painted in the Union Pacific paint for a very, very long time. They didn't even get patched into UP numbers for a long time. So these locomotives ran around on the Union Pacific for quite a while in their original paints.
Yeah, when these things were delivered, they basically took over the Rio Grande. I mean, if you were out in Colorado like we were on Tennessee Pass in 95, 96, this is all you would see. So it's not just an SP locomotive. It's if you model the Rio Grande in its very, very distant future after the SP and the Rio Grande got together, this is all you would see pulling coal trains out there, and taconite trains on the Wisconsin Central all the way west to, you know, basically all through the west.
And Jon, I've got a picture. It's not one that we're offering. I think it's probably from the same run as 114 that you're showing here, and it's brand new. It's 1995. Tony shared this with me. 144, Jefferson City, Missouri, June of 1995.
That's Daniel Schroeder did that picture, and he worked for, I think, UP, maybe.
Okay.
If I remember right. He's passed away since, but and that SP units, as Harry will tell you, didn't stay like that for long.
No, they did, Tony. They stayed clean for a while until the UP got them.
No, I mean, as far as cleanliness, that they didn't look like this for long before they got dirty. You know?
No, yeah. I mean, when we were in Colorado, they, believe it or not, even with all the tunnels, those things were still pretty sparkly for the most part. Don't look at the roof, top of the roof, maybe, but they weren't really known to be smokers that early on or anything like that. So, you know, unlike the rest of the SP Power at that late date, these were the clean ones to go after. And that stayed the case, you know, into the 2000s for, you know, when the UP got a hold of the railroad.
Now, Jon, the 114 that you were showing earlier, in fact, I could switch screens here. I'm looking at this picture. You were talking about the trucks, and I'm noticing if we look at these pictures here, you can see the struts on both trucks. I'm assuming this has got struts, 2 struts on either side. Are we doing the same thing with 114, or is it a slightly later variant?
Yes, this one is going to have the outside struts.
Okay.
On all sides, or kind of diagonal.
The opposite corners.
Okay. Now I'm looking at the font there of the 114 under the cab, and it looks different than what normally appears. So is this like a one-off unit, John?
I am seeing that too, and
Or is it a computer thing?
I'm wondering if that font isn't loaded on my computer. And
Okay,
it's not,
maybe that.
it's not rendering correctly.
Got it.
Unfortunately, if you work in a lot of fonts, you need to have an Apple computer in order to get all those. And if you work in CAD, you need a PC. And most of my day in, day outs CAD work, so I'm on a PC and sometimes get the right fonts. Here's that later run. Excited for that.
Yeah,
I'm almost as excited for these as I am the Union Pacific variations, which are coming in our Prime for Grime line.
John, so what were the differences between the early and the late? I think I know, but I'm kind of wondering if everybody wants to hear it, for the SP ones.
Have to consult my.
Well, no. Well, yeah, it's just primarily the inverter cabinet, and I think the radio antenna arrangement up top. I think were some of the main features.
There's a few different,
because it looks like you've got 2 earlies, like you were saying, and then that 336 is a late delivery. The shock struts, like you say, they changed over time or were built differently later.
Yeah, the inverter cabinet had a lot of variations here, and by counting the panels, this is what I would call a 7x3. There's 7 panels up top over 3 below.
And you've got the capacitor box sitting on the walkway there on the 336.
Yeah,
and
114.
You get all your 17 handrail arrangements, like you were saying, right where the southern is. Like you were saying, so you'll see
the vertical handrail here.
Yep.
And 336. It's a little hard to see because of the Southern Pacific logo, but there's an extra jog to help you step over the capacitor on the walkway.
Yeah, they just plunked that thing down, and that made you guys do some hood door changes too, because you can't open the hood doors if the capacitor cabinet's there. So GE had to change that up too. Yeah, I really like the AC44s. That was basically the next. That was probably going to be the standard locomotive for the SP for the next 20 years if nothing happened.
Yeah.
In one fell swoop with that 279 unit order, SP had more AC44s than they ever did, let's say, SD45 tunnel motors.
Wow.
Because that was like 200 and I don't know, 240 or so. I want to say 247, I believe. And here you got 279 right off the top. They love these things.
Yeah, they've certainly been fun to look at for me.
Yeah, they're neat engines.
What I discovered is whatever paint they used held up better than most of their other paint. It didn't fade quite as dark, as light as the typical SP unit. And I'm talking about the gray. The gray seemed to stay darker than the rest. Red is a hard pigment to work on because it fades almost immediately. But here's 6193, which is a Union Pacific number. You can see that the AC unit's been replaced on this one. It's an armor yellow. This unit has the cheek logos UP shield on both sides of the nose there. We also start to get some of the more modern warning labels, like fire extinguisher inside.
And Tony, you sent me a really good high-res image of 6193 that's illustrating what Jon is showing of our drawings here. Let me go ahead and add that real quick. There we go.
That's Jeff Carlson, who's a friend here in the Kansas City area. He actually lives over on the Kansas side, I think towards Lawrence. And he shoots all the time train stuff and does great stuff. But Jeff had this and one of the other patch jobs in the state that you guys are doing the model of, and was nice enough to share pictures with me for here and for the magazine. And I hadn't realized there were double herald patch like that. Do we know, is that fairly uncommon, or?
It is somewhat uncommon. Most of these were patched not by the same person. It was patched wherever on the railroad they were sitting. So there wasn't exactly perfect guidelines on what you should be doing when you're patching these out. It was get the UP number on it, put a herald on it, try to cover up the previous railroad if you can.
Because was it generally, didn't they put the shield down below the headlights on the nose? Is that
Yes.
right?
Yep.
On this that'd be like the template or the goal. Because this looks like somebody with a micro scale sheet that's like, well, it'd be cool to have them on both sides. Like nobody would really do that. Yeah.
I think he was probably lazy because he didn't want to cut up the shield and split it over the doors and all the handrails.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, Harry's
so
got
like,
it.
hey, look, I've
like
got two clear patches here. I got an extra sticker here. Why not?
And it lays on a nice flat surface that I don't have to worry about working over the door and the handle. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a unique look, I'll just have to say.
And speaking of Jon's point, this really did. I don't know. I didn't see a date on this one, Tony, but it looks rather current. I mean that paint's still holding up pretty good.
That is in Muncie, Kansas, February 1st of 2014.
Okay.
Yeah. So our model is pre-2005 because we haven't included the yellow sill on it.
Okay.
And this isn't the only double herald SP patch. I've identified at least half a dozen of them.
Wow.
So there's a few out there. The patch on the rear end of these locomotives is always interesting. Where do how do they do the numbers? Where do they put the patch? Someone decided they needed a little bit of armor yellow before they put the shield down. And yeah, I think my fonts aren't rendering correctly because that 6193 should be completely within the gray area there.
Yeah, Jon, I'm looking at our website, and our website is showing the correct font. So yeah, I think it's just a thing between the two different machines.
Yep.
Yeah, I've this artwork is on a larger page that has a lot of confidential information, and I've sanitized it, removing all that confidential information and measurements and specs that most people aren't interested in seeing. And I think in the process, I must have changed the fonts on these, so I apologize.
Wow. How about this, Harry? This is like we're seeing like Roswell stuff from the Air Force with like black marker all over things.
You know?
Oh, Jon, this is the sheet that's got that new.
Oh.
Yeah, it's got that.
Can't wait.
More trouble with his internet when he's telling me great news.
Oh, did my mic cut out? I'm sorry.
It cut out, but we'll move on. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, and to exemplify the customization of patch jobs, I had to do 6289. This is probably my favorite patch that's running around out there. It has a couple interesting features. Someone decided to add a lightning bolt on the nose.
Yeah.
And then they got kind of fancy on the rear end. Sorry. And I call this the flaming patch.
And to prove that it does exist, Tony was nice enough to send us this picture. It does exist.
Not wild.
It's just, yeah, it is. It's wild.
Yeah, and again, my font isn't loaded correctly, but you can see that Union Pacific is justified to the very top of the flame. It looks wrong when you see it on the artwork, but that's how it was. And this one was a fun one to match because this red faded to pink. So we try to get it as close to prototype. This is a later model. It does have the yellow sill on it. It also has the Union Pacific PTC antenna boxes on the cab roof there. And on the nose, there's your center mounted shield. And whatever red paint they used didn't stick. And it started flaking off and the SP came back.
When you set these up for prime for grime, I notice they have a nice flat. I mean, is the paint itself just a flat paint compared to, they have such a neat look to them. What's the finish or coat or something different from like a factory new, like the Chicago Northwestern? Is there something more to it, or is it just flat paint gives that look?
Yeah, our standard paint sheen is a satin. So it's less glossy than a semi-gloss. When you see these in real life, they look super glossy. And if I was to paint these with gloss paint, it would look toy-like, very plasticky. So we have to dull down the sheen. Light doesn't scale quite the same. So our standard is a satin. And on these, they do get oversprayed with a flat. We also don't start with the same colors. As modelers, we're used to taking an as-delivered model and then fading them. Here, we've actually chosen different colors that represent that fade. So you get there faster, and then you can add your rust and grime and whatnot.
They are fantastic. I get more emails on people saying how great those are to start a project on the prime for grime, whether it's freight car or locomotives, and they do look fantastic. As a collector, someone that would never weather these, even though that's why you've done it, I like to get them because they are unique and different looking pieces, even though I have no intention of ever weathering them. So yeah, they are fun models.
Yeah, they're neat. They're neat. I mean, they start you much further down the road to getting a really awesome weathered looking model than you would if you started off with an as delivered AC44 or whatever the starting point would be. I think the flat coat and the pre-fading or just using faded colors to begin with, like John was saying, is a huge plus. You know, you're just break out the chalks and everything else and the oils right away, and you have something in 20 minutes as opposed to another 3 or 4 days in here.
And the print work is so nice, like having that SP that's kind of coming back with the shreds through it. That again, those are so fascinating to see them when they're done. It's like, wow, it looks just like the real thing.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I guess I noticed a price difference too, I guess, for these, prime for grime engines, but I think that's probably because there's a lot more pad printing and hits that you guys have to do on these, right?
Yeah, when you look at the production costs of models, the big elephant in the room is the tooling cost. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars. But when it actually comes time to produce them, there's the cost of the plastic, there's the cost of assembly, and there's the cost of decoration. And the cost of decoration is actually the highest of those three. The amount of time it takes to print these is really, really high. And we talk about impressions, the amount of times that you have to do something. With the prime for grime, it's considerably more impressions because instead of just painting a nice clean UP, we have to paint some distress to it, some fading. We have to gloss the whole thing. Or I'm sorry, not gloss, flat coat the entire thing. So there's a lot of more work here, and I think most modelers will appreciate that we've kept the cost to just a $10 differential there. It gets you much further down the road, and it helps us cover our cost a little bit.
Yeah. I'm liking the PTC equipment on top of the cab of this AC44. It really lends a today look to it. You know, it's like I could just run out there and say, there it goes. Or see it on virtual rail cam somewhere or something like that.
Yeah.
It's hard picking road numbers and road names to do productions, because not only can't you produce all the road railroads that bought them at the same time, you can't produce all the numbers. You have to pick the paint job. SP went through a number of different lettering schemes. Union Pacific went through a number. And then you have eras, you know, when the reflective striping came out, when PTC came out. There's so much variation there. And we try to get very specific in our design so that we don't have an errored part on there for the rest of it. But hopefully the modelers out there can take some of the raw material starting blocks we have and modernize or backdate the models to their preference.
Yeah, I think this is a great place to start. I mean, we're starting so much further down the road than we did, let's say, 20 years ago with previous offerings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether they be from Athearn that you guys have in the Roundhouse line today, or you know, other places where you can get locomotives that were patterned after the real AC44s.
Yeah. The next thing I want to talk about was some of the variations that are out there. On the cab here, notice the window. It slides from back to front on the C&W units, and on, the CFX units, it's reverse.
Wow.
Means two different cabs for us to produce that. Another one of the interesting things is here's your traction sand fill on the nose. There's a clean out hatch. Here it is with a knuckle buster on the top. Here's the knuckle buster located on the bottom. And here's one with a lever to open the door. So we have three different variations on just that one little panel there.
Wow.
That's awesome.
You'll also notice that there's a raised area where this grab iron is on the nose of this unit. The CSX units didn't have that at all. With a smooth nose there.
Wow.
When you think number boards, are they low or are they high? Unit 420, they're low. KCS, high. But notice they're almost oval shaped, which is different from the SP.
Oh, wow.
Which are rectangular. There's little details like the blue flag holder, which is on the side of the nose. Sorry, this one's upside down. Kansas City Southern had two on the engineer side. SP had just one. And go. The CEFX units had none.
Huh.
So how many different cabs did you guys tool up for the AC44 series?
42.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's great.
Here you can see on the right side, this is what we call the 17 louver sub base here. If you count, there's 17 louvers on each one of these panels.
Mm-hmm.
That's indicative of a later design. The earlier ones had 4 screens. Let's see. There's some interesting things going on with the, let's see, which one am I looking at here? Even details like the toilet drain, which is this piece right here. That's mounted on a panel. And then that's kind of a later toilet drain. The earlier ones are a hose on a bracket.
Wow.
And I'm going to switch to CAD files here.
What amazes me here in some of this detail you're talking about, John, I did 4 pages that'll be in May's Model Railroad News, and I thought this is a little excessive, but there's the different dynamics, there's the different trucks. It's like I really don't know how I can state this, show the pictures without going to 4 pages. And now I'm sitting here thinking I really should have done like 6 or 8 pages because there's really a whole lot more than there. It's wow, it's incredible.
Yeah.
I love this CAD too because it shows, I guess, one of the KCS units, John.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, they're just so heavily optioned. I just love how they look.
Mm-hmm.
They're great.
Here you can see the 3 dynamic brake fan areas.
Yep.
On the hood. This is the central air intake for the engine. On the later models, this is towards the back. And I'm going to bring up an earlier one here.
Guys, I've got to sign off, but I really appreciate being on this call, and hi to everybody out there in internet land. But I've really enjoyed being on this presentation and really learning a lot. I'm definitely going to be reviewing the rest of this video when I get a chance after my commitment tonight.
Great.
Thanks for coming on board, Harry. We
Let's
appreciate
sign
it.
off. But thanks, you guys. We'll catch you later.
Thanks, Harry. Have a good night.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Okay.
As I was saying, this is the central air intake. On the earlier units, it's flip-flop, so that intake is to the forwards. Let's see.
When you're tooling this up, do you try to keep that as just like an opening? So then that's a separate piece that goes on the plastic hood. You know, when you talk about some of these differences, I assume that you try to, like the sand filler, the clean out things at the bottom. I assume that's an open slot on the nose, and those are detail parts added to each one to put the different knuckle busters or levers.
It's something that we try to consider. It would probably be the least expensive option to make everything an insert in our tools. But unfortunately, every time you put an insert into a tool and take it out, you wear it out and you'll start to get more and more flash. Wow. So it's actually better for some of these variations to include them. So this whole piece here that I can highlight lime green is the body.
Is a mold piece. Okay, wow.
And that's a separate mold piece.
Wow.
Some of the interesting things I like is above the prime mover here on the early units was a single hinge door. And if you look at the radius, it's arched. And then when you get to the later models, it's double hinged and it's angular. So there's all kinds of variations in these things.
And that, I remember that now, somebody rail fanning, we were at Union Station here in Kansas City, we can overhead look at those. And I remember somebody pointing that out one time, like, oh yeah, it is. That Some are angled and some have like a hump to them. Yeah.
Yeah. On the rear end of the units, the later units had the sand fill at the top of the rear hood. And here's the C&W one. They have a notch on the end.
And is some of this, do you think, production phase variations, or is this road, like do railroad spec things for some reason they want it there instead of on top, or do you know?
This is mostly phase. And
Okay.
As modelers, we assign phases. The manufacturer just builds
Right.
it, and they're trying to simplify and make things easier. I'm sure including this in sheet metal took longer than just putting it at the very top.
Up top, yeah.
One of my favorite subtle variations, the early units had an uneven spacing on these rear grab irons. If you look, they're even up to this one, and the very top one doesn't follow the same spacing. Whereas the later units, it's even spacing throughout. Let's see. I'm going to pull up another CAD file here. Here's a CEFX unit. This has just the standard range dynamic brakes, just 2 grills instead of 3. There's also a phase variation where there's grab irons behind the cab. The later units had this taller handrail across the inverter cabinet with 2 handrails, but there's even variation there. This one has just a single rail attached to the cab. The CSX one, you can see both handrails are attached.
Wow.
And then when we go back to sorry, I'm losing things on my desktop now. C&W unit, you can see there's just a single lower handrail.
Wow.
There's variations in like fuel tank design. So this is an early fuel tank, and these were bolted to the frame. There's a few places you can look. These teal components are holding the fuel tank to the frame there. And there's also this bracket right in the middle there that's stepped. That's an indicator that you're looking at an early unit with that bolted frame. The later ones have a slope to that bracket, and the ends are completely angular here. So this is an indicator of a fuel tank that's welded to the frame instead of bolted.
Wow.
We have some variations in lift rings. The later units had an actual ring. The early units had a bracket that could also hold a flag. You can see that bracket there.
Those would be like the blue men working flags, is what you're talking about?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
We have some variation in, well, this here's some cool stuff you can see here. The dynamic brakes had variations underneath them where you would unlatch and pull the door open. Some of the early units were almost scalloped with multiple finger holds. If I'm making anybody seasick, just tell me to stop. The later units were smooth.
Oh, yeah.
Another one of those cost-saving elements. You look at this access door right here to get into the dynamic brake compartment. It's got a exposed handle. Well, when you open this, that handle's going to intersect this panel. So they did some fancy sheet metal, and they actually created a cutout for that handle to fit into.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, that got expensive doing that. So they decided, let's just put a doorstop. Variations down here. This in the battery box area, there's a bolted panel versus a hinged panel with a knuckle buster.
Wow.
When we start looking at handrails, man, there's a lot of options. You can see this is what I call the narrow handrail. It has two stanchions that are facing forwards and are fairly close together. This handrail comes through a notch in the pilot, and then the gusset here is also notched. On this unit, it has an angular gusset, so none of the fancy notching. It's not notched where the handrail goes through. Your front narrow handrails are actually bent. One faces the side, and that's to make clearance for the MU connector there on top of the deck.
Wow.
Here's a good view of those etched walkway steps there. That's a feature on the Genesis 2.0. If I can find some more of those walkways.
And like, how much do you get stuff? Do you work with, like, does GE have any of this that they can give you and say, like, here's this, and this? I assume they don't, because you say this kind of gets changed as they produce stuff. So, I mean, again, this is all just out in the wild, looking at pictures and, hey, look at that's got a different, like say that gusset or the notch there, that you just have to figure out what goes to what road names, what production, and wow.
Yeah. There was a period in time when manufacturers were a little bit more forgiving with their blueprints, but now they hold them pretty tight. That's their intellectual.
Yeah, I have heard that. Yeah,
and it's hard. There's still a few manufacturers that we work with that after some rock solid NDAs are signed, we can get access to their vault and see some of their actual drawings.
Wow.
Here's yet another handrail variation on the front. I'd call this the wide style. We also see the ditch lights down on the pilot versus up on the deck, which also means there's a different anti-climber. They had to have a notch for the ditch lights there. I can keep going for hours on these differences. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, John, it's one of those things where the more you research it, you just see that even if it's for the same road and they could be separated by two road numbers, they could be different and just subtle differences. It's just amazing.
I was going to ask Harry if he knew this variation. All the SP locomotives had this additional access hatch behind the radiator panel. Whereas that feature was dropped.
Wow.
Because we have a few SP modelers on staff, I wanted to stay as close to prototypical as possible. This is a fairly standard across the industry, and I mean the railroad industry, spare knuckle holder. You'll see it on GEs, EMDs. Well, SP had a slightly different one for a while. They had, let's see, they had a basket.
I remember that. Yeah, that it.
And this is one of those parts that I decided to spend a little extra money on. We can't actually injection mold this with any detail because the amount of slides and inserts you'd need. So this is going to be a lost wax brass casting in order to get that detail.
Nice.
So I don't go to midnight tonight. Jim, maybe we should handle some questions.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. We're getting some great comments out there. And yeah, here's your chance. We've talked about it on Train Tuesday before. Now you see why we don't see Jon that much. He is just busy going through all these different details. So I'm watching the comments here. I'll throw them up on the screen. But if you got a question for Jon or even Tony about the AC4400s, or a question for Jon about maybe how we do things in development, go ahead and put that out there, and I'll put it up there for the guys to answer.
While you're looking for a question, here's another big spotting feature on the fuel tank on the the engineer side. The tanks have a straight sill here, and the air tanks are suspended from these kind of angle brackets. The later models, whoops, you don't need to section that. Have a notch in the fuel tank. The air tanks are bolted at the bottom, and they're plumbed together versus separate.
Wow. I saw someone ask Jon when you're doing a book. There.
Yeah.
Paul. Yeah.
I think I know a publisher that could probably help with that.
I'm gonna have to go back and look and see what, because I try to pick out stuff we've not done in Diesel era. I got to see what all AC4400 stuff has been done, and see if I can focus on something and bring it up. And now that I know I got somebody that can help me with all this minutia and things to look for, but I suddenly have this feeling like, man, I hope that the sun's out tomorrow. I want to go out rail fanning and see if I can spot some of these things that you've shown me here tonight. Because it's like, wait a minute, I want to see this now. So yeah, I may have to make a run out tomorrow.
Yeah. Another detail that we change a lot is the air filters. This one has a prime air dryer on the back and a prime filter up front. There's also Salem air filters and electric air dryers in the back.
Here's a question that was partially answered earlier in the show, but we'll throw it up there again. Tinted windows and removable top. Is that features on these items?
The top is not removable unless you consider the entire shell to be the top. Then you can pull the shell off. But we're not going to have the removable cab because we're having issues with alignment. Tinted windows, yes. The side windows on a number of these locomotives were tinted. The front and rear were not.
Jon, I need this by next year. We knew there was a Star Trek reference coming. There always is.
Yep.
Let's see. I've got another one for you from Brad. Obvious candidates still to go like CP, UP, and BNSF. How long until the second run? I know you said this year, but care to elaborate? Now that's up to Jon.
You know, I don't want to work in secret. I'd like to just be completely open with everyone. But one of the problems is things change. Things like Santa Fe 5704 get restored and repainted, and we like, hey, that's cool. Let's figure out a way to make that. So we have to shuffle around our production schedule sometime. We have our production schedule set, but we do have some leeway to move things. And I don't want to commit to when the second run is coming. It is coming this year, and it is not the end of the year. But I don't want to say when it is right now and then have to change it next week because something cool happens. We also have some proprietary information we don't want to let out. But
what's the address to send? Because that's one of the things too when this stuff gets announced, that I'll get that where people send me a picture and say, oh, I wish they do this, or I wish they do this scheme or this version. And I usually forward that on to Jim or you guys and say, hey, look at this. But what is that email, Jim or John, that to send pictures if you've got information, things you want to share?
Yeah, it's our Athearn product suggestions at athearn.com. You can find it on our website, contact us page. And John, you can elaborate a little bit on this too. You can send your comments of what you'd like to see in future runs as far as stuff we've done or stuff we haven't done. The developers do read them. And just because I'm assuming, John, the sheer amount that we get, we don't always respond to all of them.
Yeah, it's the best place to get your voice heard, and they get cataloged so that we can see we have 300 requests for UP and 2 for SP. We know we need to do a UP model, which is actually very interesting because when I was choosing road names, there was one specific railroad that I've heard a lot about since we released the road names, but I had absolutely 0 requests for before, and that was the Vienna.
Here's an interesting question, John, in all your research. Aussie America asked, the step handrails, is the difference because of the region and the areas they initially were rostered to, such as the southern side for the CSX network? So basically, were they chosen that way because of where they were in the region of the country?
This is where my comment about being a self-taught pianist comes in. I don't know the answer to the reason. I only know the differences. Looking at all of them, the Canadian Pacific had the narrow handrails just like CSX did on some of theirs, and then CSX went to a wide handrail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. If someone knows it, educate all of us. I would love to know.
Yeah.
Here's
and
another.
I know you guys listen all the time on that stuff. In fact, in that latest run of, was it the RS3s that just got announced, I had an email from somebody asking about a change on a couple of road numbers to make it more accurate. And I heard from Janet just a day or so ago, yes, we're changing that. So anybody that says, oh, I see that, but I didn't say anything, make sure you do, because it does happen. I got that email passed to Janet, and yep, there's changes being made in that. So this stuff does get listened to. Here's
a good question, John. It might be something something for us to worth considering in future Prime for Grime units. Rusted Rail wants to know, any chance that you would post your reference photos of the prototype and specific to the Prime for Grime versions? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, photographs are intellectual property. They have copyright assigned to them, and there's lots of places on the internet where you can find photos, but it's not something that I'm allowed to share because I am not the copyright owner, or I don't have permission from the copyright owner to share them. So I do have photos of all these, but I can't post them here for everyone to see. If you're a savvy internet user, you can probably search the road name and the road number and find a large number of the photos that I've looked at. But the best sources of photos are locked up in the private collections. There's so many people taking photos of locomotives and rolling stock out there, and they live on hard drives, on SD cards, on slides. And it's hard to actually find some really good reference material someone has taken the time to put on the internet, and they do live in these private collections. And when someone says, hey, would you do this model in this road name? I would love to do that. Hey, would you do this model in this road name? And here's 30 detail photos. All right, that just got moved up to the top of the list.
Right.
Now I've got great reference.
Yeah.
Hey, can you do this brand new model, this railroad, this road name, and here are drawings with measurements.
All right. Here's a great technical question for you, John. This is coming in from Frederick. Why don't you put stair lights on these models? And I know you've got an answer for this.
Yeah, so you're talking about the walkway lights, which is this feature right there. Cost. That's really what it comes down to. The Genesis 2.0 level is our highest level of detail, but we also are very aware of how expensive these models are. And the more lights you add, the more expensive it is. When you look inside of a model, and I will show you the inside. Let me get rid of some of this stuff. These little gray dots are surface mount LEDs, SMDs, or better known as 0402s. If you've ever seen one of these in real life, they are minuscule. And if you were to solder 2 wires onto them, you need a microscope in order to solder them on. However, there's machines that will solder them onto printed circuit boards. So that's what's sitting here is a PCB with 2 of these SMDs on it. And that's how we light a lot of these, because it's a lot easier. And then you're having a bigger wire connect to the PCB than to the SMDs. When you get down into the walkways, there's no place to put a PCB board down there. As a modeler, I absolutely have a whole roll of 0402s, and I have magnet wire, and I would solder that, and I'd route that wire up through the chassis and attach it. If you want the factory to do that, we would probably have to add $10 to the cost of the locomotive for each corner. So we're probably talking a $40 increase. And that's why we pull back on some details. We would love to do that. And maybe we'll get to that point in the future, but we are trying to be price sensitive. And it's not a feature that enough people are asking for that we're going to implement and make all people pay for it.
So another question. Let's see. This is coming in from Train Fan 1995. He says, "Hey, can you guys talk about SP getting AC 6000 CWs, and that would be a legendary run in the future?" So it sounds like he's got 2 requests there.
Yeah. The AC 6000 was the subsequent model in the horsepower race after this. It shares a lot of features, but there's a lot of visual differences. It is a very different model. There were a number of railroads that were looking at it. Eventually, only Union Pacific and CSX acquired any. The SP did have some on order, but those were canceled by the Union Pacific after the acquisition. So we would have to build a new model in order to offer that legendary livery.
Got a question from Mark. I don't think so, but I'm going to throw it to you, John. Do any of the AC 4400s in this run have beacons?
In this run, no. But you give me a second.
See, he's proving, Tony, there's a prototype for everything.
I was going to say he's looking for it right now. He must have one. Yeah, I was trying to think.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah.
We're going to see how long this takes to load. I'm really stressing my system here on its graphics processor tonight.
We've talked about all the external details. These will have what, dual cube speakers, soundtracks. What's the electronics guts going to be in these?
Yeah, well, we'll start with the Soundtrack Tsunami 2 decoder. And then it'll have the dual sugar cube speakers. Here's one that's not being offered in this run, but there's a beacon on the long hood.
Wow.
Another hint, there's etched walkway grills that you can see through.
Oh, I think I know what that is for.
Uh-huh.
So in the future, but we're cutting the tooling for it, so it will.
Oh, look at the bend in the handrail there going into the cab. Yet
Yeah.
another variation on
Oh
that.
yeah. Here's a question you might have solved in your research, John. Can you explain why in later models, as in the ES44ACs, the horn bells are facing backward instead of the front? Is it because of the Doppler effect?
I don't know if it's, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to make a guess here. I think it has to do with crew hearing. The horns are all on the long hoods, so you're blowing all that sound towards the cab. And I think they turned them around so more of the horns pointed towards the rear, or the certain frequencies pointed towards the rear that would be harder on your hearing. But that's just a guess. I don't know. I just look and say, yep, there's that horn. This one's on a square riser. The number 1 trumpet's reversed, 2 and 3 are pointed forwards. We have a lot of variations in horns, and in some of my CAD files, I don't actually have the correct horn because my CAD files are for a range of locomotives that were produced. But when we get down the final artwork, we're looking at road numbers, and sometimes there's variations there, so we swap them out.
Wow.
Yeah, that would. I mean, your comment about the orientation of the horns, that totally makes sense. I saw another comment very similar to that, and I think you answered 2 questions there for us. So let's see if we can find some more.
With the LED setups you have now, John, does the hood slide completely off the chassis mechanism? Is there no wiring connected between them anymore?
Yes. And this is going to be a little hard to see. I'm going to hide a bunch of stuff here. We use something called a pogo connector, which is a little brass nubbin. I think I have one right here. Jim, can you make me big?
Yeah, let's see. Let me remove that. And
so here's a PCB, whoops, sorry. A PCB board. And it's green. I have a green screen behind me, so it's you can't see it. But it's a PCB board, and it has these brass connectors that are on springs. And on this model, we actually have 2 sets of them. There's one towards the front and one towards the back. So the forward ones are right here. There's a total of 6 pogos. And then the back one is right here, and there's 4 more there. And that allows us to transfer power from the chassis to the shell without having wires connected between the 2.
That's nice. I like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's something I would love to offer on more models, but unfortunately it is a ton of tooling to make those corrections because you have to have, the tolerance is very tight, so you have it aligned.
I'd imagine, yeah.
quick question from RD0. Will you guys consider unnumbered models? And we've kind of we've done that with some of their freight cars recently. What about locomotives, John?
When it's been done in the past, sales have said it's not successful. We don't sell as many as people tell us that they'll buy. When you get to this level of detail, I mean, we've talked about a lot of various parts. These are road number specific. So if you want to change the road number, you may be changing it to a whole different series, which had a completely different selection of detail parts. For some people, that's fine. For others, it's it's a big deal. And that's one of the reasons why undecorated models are very, very hard for us. You know, if you were to offer one undecorated kit with 42 cabs, 27 different bodies, the cost is not going to be the same. It is going to be 4 to 5 times a decorated model, just because there's the sheer amount of various parts in there. And it's very hard to know which model someone would want undecorated. We could literally just not paint one of these, but you know, maybe we choose the CSX prototype and someone really wanted the SP variation. So it's really hard, and it comes down to business case. When we've done undecorated models, they don't sell as well as our decorated models. We would love to do it, and we may continue to do it, but not at the high end line where we have all these parts. So we may look at it at a lower levels.
Here's a great question, John, that you probably know. Randall wants to know, hey, John, what about using LEDs in older Genesis locomotives? I have a BN ST70 Mac from the mid-2000s, and I'm curious if LEDs will work without modifying the locomotive. Thank you.
So if you go to the Athearn website, in the parts section, you can buy replacement grain of wheat or grain of rice bulbs, but you can also buy LEDs. And what we've done is we've put those SMD LEDs inside of a plastic lens that is the same size as those incandescent bulbs. So you can slide them right in.
That's nice.
But here's the trick. LEDs run off of 3 volts. Your grain of wheat bulbs run off of 1.5. You're going to have to change the voltage. And if there's a decoder in there, you may have to go into the CV values and change it. You may be looking at resistors. So it's not just a one-for-one swap. There's going to have to be some changes there.
I saw one for you, Tony. This is from Split Rock. This is Tony. So are you telling me this model contains more electronics and details than the rubber band drive of the old RDCs?
Well, you know, it's all craftsmanship and art, but yes, that about 60, 70 years ago, yeah, it's changed a little bit.
Did you ever think
would be the future?
Did you ever think, Tony, 10, 20 years ago, we would see models of this caliber?
I mean, when you think about the leaps we've made in the last 20, 25 years, and I look back at things that I would have told you, I don't know how it could get better than this. And now I look at those models and go, I don't know why I ever bought those. And so, yeah, it's amazing. It is.
Yeah.
It really is.
I mean, I don't know about you guys, but back in the old day, the first thing you did was take apart a model, clean out all the grease. You put toothpaste in there.
Yes. Yep.
Polish the gears and the burrs. Out of the box, our Dash 9s run at 1 scale mile per hour.
No, it absolutely amazes me when I think, and when you think that the blue box drive of those days, you're talking about the toothpaste and the other stuff in the gearing, yet it still that was kind of the standard. That's, this is a good thing. This is not something that, well, this was the good deal. And yet now, yeah, these new models, I get them out to scale speed test, and you talk about, well, do they need any break-in period? It's like, not when they were crawling at like 0.03 miles an hour from the get-go, that yeah, they're smooth as silk right out of the box.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Here's a good, interesting comment question. I gotta find it again, but it's regarding crew figures for the locomotive. And I know we've got some great, our Genesis locomotives have a great interior, but would we ever consider doing crew figures for the locomotives, adding them as a separate detail part?
Not only have I considered it, but I've looked into it.
There we go.
You know that little box of 6 figures that costs more than a couple bills? Just like decorating a locomotive, the decoration of a figurine is very, very expensive. And it would add a lot of cost. I do see that there's a hole in the marketplace for modern crew figures, and I would love to go after that. and it's something that I am actively pursuing. But it needs to be done at a reasonable price so that we can all afford to stay in this hobby. Things are getting expensive, unfortunately, and that's just the way the world is.
I've heard the crew figure thing before, though, John. Yeah, I was at something where one of the people there said, with all the stuff we've got, I can't believe they still sell us these amazing locomotives with all these details, and there's nobody driving them. And it's like, oh, yeah, no, they don't have figures in them.
Yeah, well, let me, what's up? I love this sectional view. Here, we can peek inside the cab. We've got the control stand there.
Wow.
The screens, your buttons there. Here's your conductor fireman side. The phone on the cradle. We've got all that detail in there. It's just there's your electrical cabinets at the back. It is literally the cost of painting them. I know back in the day there was some manufacturers that offered unpainted black figures. It feels like a crime to do that, to put one of those inside of a locomotive this caliber.
That detailed, yeah.
But yeah, give me a blank slate, a blank check. I will go off the wall with details. I'll paint the toes of them yellow for this.
John, here's a good opportunity too. I mean, we've talked about it on previous live feeds and stuff, but I mean, you're not just a guy that punches into a time clock every day and does all this work for Athearn. You've been a very achieved modeler for a number of years. Why don't you just take a little bit of time and tell the audience your background in the hobby?
Okay. I don't like bragging, but I started modeling when I was 2. My father was an active model railroader. He grew up with American Flyer and switched to N scale when he was living in Florida in a trailer home on the beach in Daytona. N scale because that was the space that they had, but we're talking N scale in the 70s. It wasn't very good running, but by the time I came around a decade later, things had started to improve. We started seeing improved mechanisms out there, and you could really do a lot in N scale. My dad and I, we worked on a N-track modular layout. We started out with a partner, but in order to attend all the shows we wanted to go to, we decided to build our own layout that was complete, so we weren't part of a club, which gave us a real homogeneous look across the entire layout. And we go to a lot of train shows. And he still has that layout. It's in the basement of his hobby shop, which he started in, 1998, I think, is when he opened the store. He previously was an electrical contractor, but was forced to retire. Electricians tear up their bodies, and his retirement plan was to open a hobby shop. So that's in Monroe, Wisconsin, the Hobby Depot. He posts fairly regularly on Facebook. If you look for the Hobby Depot on Facebook, you can see a lot of his projects. He's really into lighting right now. He has some great dioramas and inclusions on the model. His railroad is the Bayside Southern Railroad. It's a freelance. He'll take models and strip them and paint them into his railroad. Bayside Southern, short for BS line. Also Brian Stackpole. But my dad's a very talented modeler, and he got me in and supported me at an early age. And I have a brain that is very tuned to detail. If you want to talk about how brains are wired, being on the spectrum just kind of hyper focuses you on things. And I think we know there's quite a few modelers that are on the spectrum in this industry, in this hobby. it became an outlet that just really interested me, and it stuck with me. I had the same break I think most people did to head off to college, do other things, get interested in women, have some kids. And now I'm at an age where I'm coming back into the hobby. In the meantime, I had a lot of experience in product development and product management, and everything aligned my knowledge of models, railroads, and my background in development and design that brought me into this position. And now I live it and breathe it every day.
Yeah. And yeah, we have to be careful sometimes when we're at work talking, because we've been known to talk about all different types of model railroading, because we, like I said, 90% of the Athearn team, we're modelers, from customer service all the way to our product manager. So it's one of the, we're all doing what we enjoy doing every day, and really happy about you guys coming on board here with us tonight and asking some questions. In fact, I've got an interesting comment / question, and Jon, I think we've talked about this in the past, so I want to put this up. This is coming from SoCal Scale Models, saying, can you guys take into account placement of current keepers with future designs? Currently, there's very little to almost no room in some of the 4-axle models for one.
Yeah, it is tough. As a manufacturer, we're trying to design a locomotive that appeals to everyone. There are still people who are running on the carpet with straight DC setups, and we need to have electronics that will do DC. There's the DCC trend, which is definitely caught on and is the majority of the industry. And things keep getting refined. To get more room in a locomotive, you have to take away something, and that's usually weight. If you take away weight, it doesn't run as well on DC. So it's definitely a challenge. The boards that we produce, this is not a good example. This is our DCC ready model. It's showing the base PCB board and then the 21-pin dummy plug there. So if you're converting to one of the other major DCC brands, this is what it's going to look like inside. But on our Tsunami 2 boards, we're actually having Soundtrax build a custom board for us that takes the place of this PCB. And on that board, we've included a plug so that you can plug your current keeper directly into the board without having to figure out where you need to wire it. And there is a challenge on where to put it. There's some room underneath the cab. There's some room underneath the radiator. A lot of the current keepers are very large. You can get away with just a couple capacitors usually, just to get you over those rough spots. These are pretty good running machines, and they don't need much kick at all to keep them going over dead spots.
Here's a question for you, Jon. This comes from Train Fan 1995. He says, any way you can make some SD45-2B Santa Fe's and some B30-7AB BN? Wow, there's some cool stuff.
Yeah, those B30s.
Yeah.
I like those. I like those a lot.
I do too.
It always comes off to, we're going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars and literally years of time researching these. And at the end of the day, Athearn is still a business. Will we make any money, or are we losing money, or are we just doing this for fun? We have to pay the bills, keep the lights on. And when you look at some of those weird one-offs like the 45B, there wasn't a lot of them out there, and they only existed on a couple railroads. So there's not a lot of opportunity for us to market that. If it's popular enough, we absolutely will do it. If enough people send in email suggestions, we will put it on the list and start working on it. Or maybe we are already working on it and we'll just move it a little bit higher in the list. There's definitely some unique locomotives out there that are fairly special, but are worth modeling. But everyone has a pet project that they'd love to have done. As a Milwaukee Road modeler, I've got more than a few.
Here's a good comment suggestion from Kyle. And you know what? Maybe with things opening up, this something we can consider. Could we see a video about the process of making these models? I think it would be very interesting to see. Yeah, I think so too.
I'd love to have an Athearn video. I am not a videographer by any means. And honestly, there are a number of videos from other manufacturers. It's all the same process. The ways that our things are different are things that we can't show you because they're proprietary. But there are some great videos out there. I've seen German manufacturers, I've seen American manufacturers, I've seen Japanese manufacturers. The process of cutting the tooling, creating the slides and inserts, injection molding, the decoration process, the assembly process. It's all basically the same process across all the manufacturers. But unfortunately, because of COVID, we haven't been to the factory for a number of years. And as soon as travel opens up, I'll be headed to China a couple times a year, probably, if not more. And we'll have opportunity to get some of that footage and show you around. It is very interesting.
Let's see. Here's a question that probably both of us can answer. This is coming in from Bobby. How has your response been with the FMG models, and will you continue making more Australian iron ore locomotives? We did pretty good with our last run, if I remember right, John.
Yeah, I mean, that was the Dash 9s, and we also had the SD90 Mac Phase 2s, which were detuned to 710s and shipped off after the 245s. And what's my number? 264? The 4-cylinder EMD that produced 6,000 horsepower.
So
yeah,
Tony, go ahead. Sorry, John.
Australian modeler community out there, and when we get the requests, we'd love to do them if we can.
I think the Australian stuff is so neat. I think it's the current, which might be April or March. Railfan has got a whole story on some of the iron ore, or the Australian railroads, and I always find those really fascinating. That it's neat stuff.
Yeah. So Tony, I bet you're getting excited about doing a review on one of these AC4400s.
I am, especially now that I know all this other stuff. As I say, it's you kind of think from you guys put out so much information, and this is going to be different. This is going to be unique from the different road names. But boy, the stuff we've learned and seen tonight, it's like, yeah, I only had a little bit of the info. So it just, as I say, it's so charges you up on this stuff. It's like, man, I want to get out and do some rail fanning and see how many of these I can dig up and get pictures of and start spotting some of these things that John has pointed out. It's like, oh, wow. Because it never fails on these things. You think, well, I never knew that. But then once somebody tells you, you see it, then you see it all the time. Like, oh, yeah, I noticed that feature all the time. But there was a point where I didn't even know it existed. So
it's kind of like, when you buy before you buy a red car, you never see them. And then when you buy a red car.
Everybody has a red car.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's definitely, there's so much information here, and I want to thank John again for taking time out of his busy schedule to show us all this information. And there's going to be more. This is, it's just amazing how much information there is on just this one model, and with future releases coming out as well. You can be sure we're going to see your favorite line sooner than later. And with that, Tony, I'm going to ask you, which one's your favorite out of the line? Which, if you could get yours tomorrow for review, what railroad would it be?
There's two that I'm going to get from this group: the Chicago Northwestern, any one of those. And for some reason, I got to have that UP patch with the hot rod flames on the back.
Hey,
So those are the two I'm picking up out of this group. Yeah.
nice, nice.
Hey, Jim, I saw a comment swing by real fast asking about another project.
Oh, this one
that's in
here?
the works. Yeah.
Yeah, by Christopher. He's wanting to know, do we have any updates on the Surfline? Oh, look at this. I'm going to make,
Oh.
hold on, John. Hold that up there, and I'm going to minimize us.
Yeah, I've got test shots in my hand. So they are coming along. And these are test shots. These are where we make sure everything fits and works, and we'll make some changes before they go to production. But we are moving along on this project. And they are coming. And like I said in the AC4400 project, when you want to cut tooling for a project, you want to cut all the tooling. So the Surfliners and the California cars, which we haven't announced that we're making, are very similar.
Yeah.
Wise if we had cut the tooling for the California cars. Especially since one of the cars I just showed you wasn't a Surfliner.
Ah.
Wow.
See, this is why John doesn't let me in the development room, because there's so much to see. Let's
I
see.
get all kinds of fun toys.
So with that, you knew that, and John, you and I are in the Athearn group. You and I are the N scale guys too. N scale Surfliners, please. I think he really wants those.
No, I hear that. I get that email a lot too. Do you think Athearn will do those in N scale? It's like I pass it along every time I hear it.
Yeah. N scalers need to be a little bit more vocal than they are. It costs, amazingly enough, it almost within $1 that costs the same to make an N scale product as an HO product, and the tooling costs are about the same. So it's very expensive, and there's not as many N scalers. But if there's a popular project, we absolutely will do it. And we recently put out a survey asking what projects could we offer in N scale, and I do know Surfliners were on that list. So we are looking into it, and you might be seeing them.
Well, Tony, any other thoughts? We're starting to slow down a little bit in the questions, so we might be signing off soon. Do you have any other comments or questions about the AC4400 that you want to ask John before we sign off?
John, what's the expectation on these? Is it like March of next year, about a year from now, for delivery, maybe?
That's what we're planning on. Who knows what the world is going to be? You know, we've definitely been experiencing shipping slowdowns as containers have been in short supply. Boats have been in short supply to move the containers. Ports have been clogged with containers, and we can't get them off the boats, and then we can't get them onto a train, and we can't get them to our DC. We've been doing really good at keeping product flowing and keeping it moving, but we are starting to see things start to stretch out a little bit. And a year from now is the general timeline, and we'll certainly have samples to show long before then, both test shots and decorated samples.
They should be fantastic because, again, it's built on your Dash 9, and those Dash 9s, we've got a review of that coming up from the first run, and those were fantastic models. So, proven that it's all there. So the AC44 is a no-brainer to be just as good.
Yeah, and I went back and I looked at all the feedback we had on the Dash 9s, and I made improvements to these. These AC4400s are going to be better, more accurate than those Dash 9s.
Yeah, well, John, great time with you tonight. Again, I want to thank you and Tony. Thank you for coming on board with us tonight,
Okay.
and Harry, we're glad that he could come on board too. And for you guys out there watching this from your workshop, working on your own layout or your next project, we're going to be doing more of these throughout the year. We've got a lot going on at Athearn, and we're all excited to share it with you, like we did tonight. So be sure to watch our social media threads. Don't forget we're on TikTok now, and you can also go to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell for updates. And don't forget, we've got Train Tuesday coming up next Tuesday, 7 o'clock Central, and we'll share some more great Athearn stuff. So with that, guys, unless there's something else you want to say, I think we're going to pull the pin on this episode.
Awesome. John, amazing work. As I say, there's so much detail to it. And what we've covered tonight is it's wow, even more. So very, very cool.
Yeah, our customers have demanded this level of attention, and we are responding. So, and thank you to everyone who stuck with us for over 2 hours.
Yeah.
And the future YouTubers who are watching us tomorrow and the following day.
Yeah, that's right. All right, everybody. I hope, thanks again for joining us, and thanks to John and Tony and Harry for joining us. Let's have a great night, do some good modeling, and above all, high greens, everybody. Good night.